The thick forest swallowed the dying light as dusk settled over the treetops. Jackson navigated the worn trail with a confident stride, leading his group of friends deeper into the wilderness. Behind him, Sarah scrambled over fallen logs and tangled roots, with less agility, shooting uneasy glances into the gathering shadows. "We'll make camp soon," Jackson called back reassuringly. "The spot I found is just over this ridge." He crested the hill and paused, taking in the small clearing below. Moss-covered stones ringed a barren patch of earth, the remnants of an ancient fire pit. Overhead, towering pines blocked out the fading sun, cloaking the area in a twilight hush. Broken only by bird song. Satisfied, Jackson waved the others forward. "This will do for the night. Help me gather firewood while there's still light to see by." Emma and Austin hurried past with arms full of kindling, eager to prove their worth after weeks of bickering back home. Only Mike lagged behind, shoulders hunched as if carrying unseen weight. His usual smiles were absent, replaced by a brooding scowl that deepened the circles under his eyes. Jackson fell in step beside his old friend. "You doing okay, man? We're all worried about you." Mike shrugged without meeting his gaze. "I'll be fine. Just needed to get away from everything, you know?" Before Jackson could reply, Sarah's cry cut through the din of chirping crickets. She stood frozen by a gnarled pine, one hand pressed to its bark as if to steady trembling legs. Carved into the wood was a single word: "Beware." "What do you think it means?" Sarah asked in a hushed voice. Jackson laughed, clasping her shoulder. "Probably just some kids pulling a prank. There's nothing out here that we can't handle." But as darkness enveloped the forest, swallowing even the last flickers of firelight, unease crawled up Sarah's spine that not all threats were so easily dismissed. Something ancient and nameless lurked in these woods. But for now, its true nature remained cloaked in the shadows of the trees. The friends sat, huddled around the crackling fire, wrapped in blankets against the chilly night. Despite Jackson's reassurances, an air of unease had settled over the group as shadows danced along the tree line. Austin poked at the flames, sending embers spiraling into the sky. "You know, my cousin Bobby swore he saw the Wendigo out by Crowley Falls one time. Said it was taller than any man, all bones and claws. Just stared at him from the trees before melting back into the dark." Emma scoffed. "There's no such thing as monsters, Austin. It was probably just a shadow or something." But Mike shuddered, pulling his blanket tighter. "What if it's real? Lore like that doesn't come from nothing. Ancient peoples knew these lands far better than we ever could." An owl's mournful hoot split the night, drawing a squeak from Sarah. She shuffled closer to Jackson, gazing fearfully into the blackened woods. "Do you really believe none of the old stories? What if something's watching us right now?" As if in response, a piercing howl rose in the distance, followed by more joining in a chilling chorus. Austin paled. Those didn't sound like normal wolves to me. A branch snapped loudly nearby, sending the group leaping to their feet with heart racing. Jackson brandished a flaming brand, peering into the endless tree trunks. See, it was just a rabbit or deer. Nothing to. A bone-chilling scream shattered the stillness, cutting off Jackson mid-sentence. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, rising to an agonized crescendo before dying away unnaturally. For a long moment, none dared breathe as silence descended once more. Then, as one, they burst into a frenzied flurry of movement, snuffing the fire and bundling gear with shaking hands. Whatever had made that sound, human, it was not. Jackson grabbed 2 packs, thrusting one at Mike. Go, now. We'll never outrun it in the dark, but putting distance between us can't hurt. Stay quiet and stick together. They fled into the black depths of the forest, branches whipping cruel barbs across exposed skin. Behind, another screaming howl rose, closer now, as if herding prey toward its waiting maw. Sarah's breath caught in a sob of terror, but she dared not pause, renewing her sprint with flagging strength. Friends raced blindly through the night, heedless of direction in their panic. Only when heavy lungs burned with the effort did they stagger to a stop, gasping in the choking dark. Huddled together, they strained their eyes and ears for any sign of... There. A shadow detached from the trees, lurching towards them with unnatural speed. Bone-white claws glinted hungrily in the moonlight as frothing jaws stretched wide. In that split second before impact, all saw the Wendigo for what it was, a gaunt nightmare given flesh and song. Then it was upon them. The Wendigo's claws raked savagely across Austin's chest, tossing him aside like a rag doll. His screams were cut brutally short, replaced by the wet sounds of feeding. "Run," Jackson bellowed, shoving the others ahead of him into the forest. They plunged blindly through the dense undergrowth, branches whistling past as the monster gave chase. Its guttural cries echoed all around, disorienting them in the smothering dark. Up ahead, Emma stumbled with a choked cry. Mike grabbed her arm, yanking her upright just as ivory talons slashed the air where she had been. They pelted on, breath tearing raggedly from parched throats. Somewhere behind, more screams rent the night. "Jackson, please." Sarah begged through gasping sobs. "He can't be." "We can't." Then the Wendigo was upon them once more, materializing from the blackness with unnatural speed. Mike spun to face it, brandishing a fallen branch as a pitiful club. The thing batted it aside contemptuously, seizing him in a nightmare embrace. Sarah screamed, and Emma shut her eyes, unable to watch as the creature began to feed. A sharp crack split the air, Mike's neck breaking under its vicious bite. Then all was silent save their own fearful panting. "We have to keep moving," Jackson urged grimly, pulling the others onward. "It's toying with us, driving us to exhaustion before the final kill. Stay close, and whatever you do, don't stop." They fled endlessly through the claustrophobic dark, branches tearing at clothing and skin alike. Every snapped twig sent adrenaline surging, but no attack came, only the hissing whispers in the trees, goading them ever onwards into the depths of the forest. Dawn found the friends staggering blindly through the undergrowth. Emma collapsed against a gnarled trunk, sides heaving. "Please, no more," she begged softly. "We're all that's left. Just let it end." But Jackson only shook his head, grimly. "It wants us hopeless and broken before the final strike. As long as we have each other, there's still a chance. Come on, just a little farther. I think I see." A shadowy structure emerged between the boles, lattice walls blackened by time. The abandoned cabin. Maybe within they could find weapons or clues to fighting this predator on its own turf. With renewed purpose, they staggered the last yards and burst inside, slamming the rotting door behind them. At last, they had a moment to rest, sinking to the grimy floor in exhaustion. But as they caught their breath, another sound reached their ears, a scrabbling at the door, as if claws tested its resilience. Beyond, a haunting howl rose to shatter the false solace of dawn. It had found them once more, and this time there would be no escape. The scrabbling at the door grew more insistent, joined by a low, ominous growl. Jackson placed a steadying hand on Sarah's quaking shoulder as he peered out a grimy window. Beyond, in the gray light of dawn, a gaunt shadow paced back and forth. Frost, white claws dug furrows in the earth as its bone. Thin frame writhed and twitched in an unnatural mockery of hunger. But there was an intelligence in those fathomless black eyes that sent an icy shiver down Jackson's spine. "It knows we're trapped," he murmured to the others grimly. "But we're not dead yet. Help me barricade the doors while I think of a plan." As one, they shoved rickety furniture and debris against the only exits, unwilling to contemplate another nightmarish chase through the woods. When at last they were finished, Jackson turned to rummage through the cabin for supplies. A nest of rags caught his eye. No, not rags. Tattered remnants of clothing once worn by the missing. Now little more than tatters and bones. The grim discovery stole what remained of their hope, as sure as any death blow. "If we don't defeat it soon, this will be our fate," Jackson said heavily. "But I think I see a way. Look for anything that could burn, oils, fuels, chemicals. When I give the word, we light the biggest blaze we can and drive the bastard back." Outside, the scrabbling had ceased, replaced by a chilling mockery of birdsong that set their nerves on edge. Still, it toyed with them, content to wear down their resolve until the breaking point. At last, they had gathered an arsenal of combustibles, waiting tensely behind barricaded walls. Jackson risked a glance outside and fell back with a strangled cry. Two mangled forms lay unmoving in the clearing, torn and gnawed beyond recognition. "No," Emma whispered, hands flying to her mouth. "Not after all this." A familiar jacket identified the first remains as Mike. But the second, with a sob, Sarah collapsed to her knees, clutching a shred of pink fabric to her breast as her world shattered. It had picked them off, one by one, toying with its prey in cruelest sport. Now there were only two left to face this nightmare to its grim conclusion. Jackson gathered Sarah close, pressing a fierce kiss to her tear-stained cheeks. Then he turned to the door, torch held high. "Come and get us, you son of a bitch. It ends here, one way or another." With a wordless cry of anguish and hatred, he flung open the door and cast forth their fiery challenge into the forest dawn. The Wendigo's answering howl shook the very trees as it leapt into their suicidal trap with ravenous fury. Final confrontation had begun. The Wendigo tore through the flames with unnatural speed, jaws agape in a scything howl of rage and hunger. Its eyes blazed with more than mere animal instinct, a primeval malevolence that recognized its quarry's final defiance. Jackson's answering war cry met its charge, swinging the torch, two-handed like a club. The Wendigo batted it aside almost contemptuously, talons raking savagely for his throat in a single fluid movement. But it had overextended, leaving an opening he exploited with the instincts of a cornered animal. His feet lashed out, connecting solidly with its gaunt ribcage in a bone-crushing kick. The blow sent the creature stumbling back amidst a shower of sparks, its ghastly visage momentarily wreathed in flame. Sarah scrambled to Jackson's side, clutching another flaming brand in shaking hands. Together, they pressed their attack against the staggering monster before it could recover its footing. It was no longer toying with them. This was a battle to the gruesome death. The Wendigo howled in mingled rage and agony as they forced it back, step by step, into the forest. Finally, it turned to flee, vanishing into the tree line under cover of billowing smoke. Jackson turned to Sarah, grasping her shoulders. "We heard it. Now let's get out of here while we—" A shower of blood flecked his face as bone-white talons erupted from Sarah's chest. Wide eyes met his in mute horror before the light within guttered out forever. With a contemptuous flick, the Wendigo tossed her limp form aside to reveal its smoking visage. Now, there was only Jackson alone to face this nightmare. He backed away slowly, choking on smoke and grief as the monster prowled closer. Its wounds had already knitted together unnaturally fast, leaving not even scars behind. Futile. This thing could not be stopped by mere mortal means, but if he was to die, it would not be cowering in fear. Jackson flung his last torch with all his strength, caught the Wendigo full in the face once more. As it reeled, he turned and fled deeper into the inferno. Lit woods with a cry torn between anguish and defiance. Behind, it gave chase with howls of promised torment. Stumbling blindly through billowing smoke, Jackson burst from the trees onto a hilltop overlooking the burning forest below. And there, half hidden among the boulders, a shadowy foundation, and behind it a deep fissure in the earth. An idea took root in his panic-stricken mind. If he could not destroy this nightmare, perhaps he could bury it instead. The Wendigo emerged behind him with a lunge, claws almost grazing his heels. With a yell, Jackson dodged, letting its momentum carry it onwards, straight over the cliff's edge, into the pit below. He scrambled to the crumbling lip, peering into the gloomy depths, just as the Wendigo regained its feet with an enraged howl. Its burning gaze found his silhouetted against the burning sky, promising a fate worse than any death. Then, Jackson grinned savagely, lifted a rock, and with all his strength, brought it down upon the unstable edge. Loose earth and rubble cascaded into the abyss, burying the shrieking monster beneath an avalanche with final, resounding crashes. His work was done. Utterly spent, Jackson sank to his knees amidst the swirling ashes as darkness took him at last. The forest had reclaimed another victim, but the survivor's remains would never be found, for in the primordial depths, below the buried pit, an ageless hunger still stirred. Jackson woke to sunbeams filtering through scorched treetops, illuminating swirling ash like dark snowdrifts. For a moment, he thought the nightmare had ended, but a rustle in the blackened undergrowth sent adrenaline surging through weary veins once more. Gripping a fallen branch spear, he staggered to his feet, peering through the wreckage. Had it somehow clawed free of its rocky tomb to claim him as well? But the figure emerging was no gaunt predator. Austin limped into the clearing, chest and arms swathed in bloodied bandages that had once been his shirt. "Jackson," he croaked, "you're alive." Overwhelming relief warred with fresh anguish as Jackson embraced his friend. Austin, but the others? Austin shook his head grimly. Gone. It got Mike and Emma, but left me 4. Later, I hid and followed the fire to you. Grief slowed Jackson's thoughts like clinging mud. Survivors meant the nightmare wasn't over, but uniting their strengths was the only chance of escape. He slung Austin's arm over his shoulders. "Can you walk? We need to get as far from here as—" A howl ripped through the tranquil dawn, raw and agonized but carrying an unmistakable note of vengeful triumph. Jackson froze, meeting Austin's frightened gaze. No, it wasn't possible. He'd buried it alive under tons of earth and rubble. Yet the howl came again, closer now, accompanied by the crackling rending of woods being torn asunder in its path. It was coming for them. Adrenaline burning through exhaustion, Jackson hauled Austin into a staggering run. They careened blindly between scorched trunks, branches whipping their faces as the howls closed in from all sides. There was no escape this time. The Wendigo had hunted them to its conclusion and would not be denied its final kill. Jackson risked a glance over his shoulder at the nightmare on their heels. Through the drifting ash, 2 pinpricks of hateful crimson light burned with promise of unending torment. A vicious smile stretched its blackened jaws impossibly wide. With hysterical strength, he redoubled his efforts, half dragging the flagging Austin. They had to make a stand. And this, no matter the cost. A clearing loomed ahead. Jackson spun, shoving Austin behind as the Wendigo burst from the tree line with outstretched talons. This was it. For our friends, he rasped, and lunged to meet the monster in its killing embrace. Scarlet jaws stretched wide to receive him, and out of the swirling ashes, 2 figures emerged behind the Wendigo. With bone-chilling screams of vengeance, Mike and Emma sank bloody hatchets into its skull. The monstrosity reared with an agonized howl, flailing at its newest attackers. In its moment of distraction, Jackson drove his spear deep into its gaping maw. With an unearthly wail, it toppled forward, limbs twitching feebly as carnelian flames lit from within. At last, the Wendigo was no more. Exhausted beyond measure, Jackson sank to his knees. Austin scrambled to embrace him as Mike and Emma stumbled over, embraced in mingled joy, grief, and disbelief. Somehow, against all odds, they had survived. The nightmare was over at last. As the ashes settled, the 4 survivors turned away from that blighted forest, supporting each other into the light. Their scars would remain, but in unity there was strength and the promise of life after darkness.